Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at the devblog for the Heinkel HE115 C-1. This is a new seaplane that is coming in for Germany at rank 1, and to be honest, it's looking pretty fun. It is also nice to see a seaplane in the standard tech tree. I feel like a lot of seaplanes / hydroplanes have been added to the game, and we haven't been able to see them because they've just been stuck on cruisers or even larger machines. It would be nice to see those vehicles in the tech trees. You know, we do have stuff like the F1M2, the OS2Us, obviously the RO44, but now it's time for another one. But hopefully they can add all the others too, including the big old walrus. The HE115 is not just coming to Germany in rank 1, it's also coming in a form to the Swedish tech tree with slightly different armaments, but still should play pretty much the same. One thing I do want to point out is in the video that they do for the Heinkel, when it goes to torpedo a French destroyer, you can tell by the lineup that it's going on that it's just going to miss. And then in the shot afterwards, it's just the French destroyer just going past it and the torpedo missing. I don't know why they didn't reshoot that part, but it just looks so funny. Anyway, let's get into the history of this machine. Development of what would become the HE115 commenced shortly after the German Air Ministry issued a set of requirements for a new multi-role seaplane design in 1935. The companies deciding to submit design proposals were Heinkel and Hamburger Flugzeugbau, a subsidiary of Blohm & Voss. Both companies produced a prototype, which were subjected to comparative testing, with Heinkel's HE115 being declared the winner of the competition in early 1938. During the testing phase, the aircraft caught the attention of prospective foreign operators, namely Norway and Sweden, both of whom would end up signing orders. Soon after production ramped up in 1939, the HE115 also entered service with its primary operator, the German Luftwaffe, just in time to take part in the outbreak of hostilities which would kick off the Second World War. During these early days, the HE115 was particularly used to drop aerial sea mines in the English Channel, as well as conducting raids on Arctic convoys, with the latter operations proving especially successful due to the initial lack of protection for the convoys. Throughout the remainder of the war, however, the HE115 would find itself in the typical role of a maritime reconnaissance aircraft, and would even be involved in missions to deploy agents behind enemy lines. Thanks to its rugged design and popularity among crews, the HE115 remained in service even well after the Second World War, particularly with Sweden, who decommissioned their aircraft as late as 1952. In total, over 130 units were built. So in the German aviation tree, the variant that we're going to get is the C-1. The C-1 has access to two BMW 132K radial engines. These produce nearly about 1,000 horsepower each, meaning that this thing does have a decent amount of power behind it, but it also is pretty heavy, which is its main issue. This means that its overall top speed is only 310 kilometers an hour. On the dev server, this thing didn't have access to any mines or anything like that, but it would be kind of interesting to see if it did or not. The vehicle itself had access to 500 kilo bomb, or two 250s, or even a torpedo, which for me seemed pretty cool. The major thing that this vehicle had, though, was its armament. The armament is so odd on this thing. So it has access to, of course, a kind of defensive turret in the back, which is very standard for a lot of these vehicles. And then also it had a defensive turret in the front, where someone would sit in front of the pilot. Then the 15mm offensive fixed armament too, which all sounds really nice. But then it has guns sticking out of the engines, or at least sticking out of the engine covers. And they do have a little bit of maneuverability, so they are able to move a slight bit. So in a perfect lineup, in a perfect time, what's going to happen is if somebody gets behind you, you are going to be able to get all three guns on them. Now, this is in a very, very limited arc and a very, very limited small area. But generally, it's just not going to really change anything for the vehicle, because at that point, because you're going so slow, you're probably just going to get hit up anyway. When I think about this vehicle, I think it's just another one which you can maybe bring along to naval forces in order to not just bomb something, but also cap zones. So in like the coastal area, or even in like the very, very early blue water area, it can still be useful in its own ways. One of the tragedies of the German tech tree is the HE-51 hydroplane. I know that sounds really weird because, well, it's just a standard hydroplane, but the fact that it's not available for everybody basically means that Germany doesn't have a vehicle at the lower echelons of the game which you can kind of rely on to be able to cap zones and do all of that stuff. Germany also really lacks a lot of vehicles which just have access to anything to do with torpedoes. Like there's still some options that they could add, you know, the Ju-87, which was kitted out to carry a torpedo, but the torpedo slingers that you have in the German tech tree are pretty much like the HE-111s, which is quite surprising. So to have another one which is able to do that would be super useful for the vehicle in itself. I'm hoping that we just get more hydroplanes in the tech trees as well. Like, I know that in general they're not seen as useful as others, but at the same time they are vehicles which, at least now when it comes to War Thunder, do have more of a role than they did previously, and they're always beautiful vehicles to look at. I know a few people are actually working on some in a user mission capacity, or not user mission, sorry, but user model capacity, which is pretty cool. But I'm hoping that we just get more of these as we go on, especially with the more expansion of naval forces that will come in over time. The other thing is Sweden also gets a variant of this, as we talked about the T2. The T2 is very similar to this vehicle. It obviously gets Swedish bombs instead of German bombs, and it loses the 15mm, and what it does is it only gets two 8mm defensive turrets, one in the front and one in the back. So technically its armament is worse, which is why it's lower BR. On the dev server, this one was actually 1.3, and the Swedish one was 1.0. So not a huge difference between them, but definitely something to at least think about and look at between the two vehicles. For me, I think it's just going to be a bit of fun. You know, one of the critiques that I had of the update, and I said previously, was that there wasn't really any lower tier vehicles for planes. Like, they just kind of completely forgotten about them. And then on the dev server this time, at least we had two of them in the form of the Heinkel and also the T2. I'm hoping that we get a few more, obviously, because these vehicles are pretty nice, and I know a lot of people are etching for the update to come, and I'm sure it will next week. But one of the problems, at least for me, is I think a lot of the conversations are always around like the top tier vehicles, and always around, you know, what vehicle is going to dominate and what's going to go crazy. Like, is it the MiG-29 SMT, or is it the F-16C, or is it, how's the new Leopard 2 doing, or what about the new Leclerc, you know, all of these things. But the thing at the end of the day is all of these vehicles here, you know, all of these like lower tier ones are going to affect people a lot more than a random top tier vehicle. The chance of somebody playing something like the 115 is a lot higher than playing something like the Leopard 2 PSO, just because the amount of people who start the game and never reach, you know, the top echelon of it. The fact is also that arcade, as we know now, is the most popular game mode, and stuff like this can easily fit in lineups and also have a bit of fun with at the lowest tiers. And that to me is very important, so people can just kind of enjoy themselves and wander around. So I've always been much more interested in the mid-tier / lower tier stuff because it affects more people, and also it's much easier to grind. So I can have these small, interesting, nice experiences over, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 games, finish the vehicle, and then kind of move on to other stuff. And that feels much nicer than slogging out 100 to 150 games on an end-of-the-line vehicle and getting super annoyed at it. As always, though, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Juan the Panda, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Bareen, Peter Grayling, Alan Hacker, Sem Alslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R, and also Lafouche for supporting the channel.